Mate, it's a creek. You don't own the river, mate.
It was a talk of town.
But I've heard that you threaten people with rifles and shit.
Something's going to happen out there one day. Someone's going to get hurt.
The next minute, a high-powered rifle shot.
Shit. Second gunshot rang out.
A gold prospector vanishes.
Bruce was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
No body, no murder weapon.
No DNA.
It became Australia's biggest crime scene
What do you think they've done with his body?
and landed 2 Outback drovers behind bars for life.
I don't think I'll come across a case like this ever again. It's just unbelievable.
On 60 Minutes,
Growing up, so many girls, were you close?
Yes.
13 years on.
Can't accept it. They didn't do it.
Do they deserve another shot at proving they didn't do it?
It's just ridiculous. Where's the fresh evidence? There's none.
Hello again and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity, Clancey, and joining us today is our beautiful producer, Anne Worthington. Welcome, Anne.
Hello, how are you?
Extra minutes. We might need a few extra minutes for this case today. It's
Yes.
this story, the story that played out in 2012 on Palmerville Station up in Cape York in far north Queensland. What a yarn.
What a yarn. So many twists and turns at every point. I think one thing that we both experienced being in Palmerville is that this is a case whilst a lot of Australia might not have heard of it, certainly in this part of Australia in far north Queensland, it was like the bush telegraph. It's what happened and what played out at that station has become almost like folklore.
And everyone has their own version of events
Exactly.
about what played out on July
Yes.
9 in 2012.
Yes.
They're very divided as well, aren't they? Somebody knows somebody involved. Somebody has an opinion on somebody involved in this case. They all had their thoughts.
They did, and I suppose a lot of rumour goes with that as well. But I think a lot of the mystery surrounding the case is that there's never been a body found. There was no murder weapon ever found, and so the case was a circumstantial case, and I think that is always a bit of a risk with the circumstantial case is that it does allow for that speculation, and in this case as well, it's in the outback of Australia. It does have all that intrigue for all those reasons.
So what we do know is that Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber were both found guilty of murdering Bruce Schuler on their property in 2012. What supposedly happened on that day, just to give some information to listeners?
So Bruce Schuler, who was a 48-year-old family man, keen prospector, they were prospecting for gold. So this particular area of Australia is rich in the prized metal, and he was a keen prospector. He'd got a mining licence recently that was near Palmerville Station, and he was hoping to spend he'd recently retired, and he was hoping to spend his time fossicking for gold. This particular camping trip, he went away with 3 mates and his faithful dog Red, and they trespassed onto Palmerville Station. And what played out after that was witnesses never saw the murder happen, but they did claim that between them, there was 3 friends. Between them, they claimed to have either heard or saw the landowner's ute and glimpses of them that morning before 2 gunshots rang out.
And they went there. I mean, they knew that Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber had become quite obsessed with people trespassing on their land, but gold fever is quite a thing, you know. I mean, Palmerville Station was famous in the late 1800s, back in the gold rush days. 150 years on, it's still, you know, even us being out there, we went out to Palmerville for a couple of days to capture this story. Gold fever exists. I mean, even standing there in between takes when we're recording the different sequences with, you know, Fiona and Bruce's family, you're looking around. You're looking around for... I was.
You were.
I think, you know,
we didn't have fossicking licenses,
we didn't,
so you
no,
wouldn't have
we
been
didn't.
able to
So
do
I was,
anything.
but they were there because
Yes.
one of the mates had found gold recently
Yes.
in that spot. So they knew that they were trespassing at the time, and they knew that the landowners were feisty about people coming onto their land, protecting the gold and protecting their land. How did it escalate to a death, to a shooting, to Bruce? I mean, Bruce didn't have any previous run-ins with the landowners, to our knowledge, but ends up, fatally shot on that morning.
I think the why in all of this is still very much unknown, and something that the family has to live with every day as to why that happened. There did seem to be a reputation with Stephen Struber and Diane Wilson and them kind of bailing up people that came onto their land. It depends on what side you want to ask about how bad that reputation was, but certainly, for the Schuler family, they say that their reputation was notorious. Others say, well, yes, they did bail up people that were on their land, but they weren't, aggressive or, in terms of the escalation of then what happened that morning, I think, the why is still a big unknown.
And a big part of that is because Bruce's body has never been found. Wilson and Struber have never given any information about where Bruce's body could be, despite being convicted of his murder and sentenced to life.
Yes. Well, they've always maintained their innocence.
And they say, what do they say? They weren't there and they didn't do it. And 13 years on, they still are sticking to that story. We weren't there and we didn't do it. That, of course, has robbed Fiona, Bruce's widow, and his two children, Bruce Jr. and Lisa, of that closure, that bringing their dad, knowing, what happened to their dad and being able to bring his body home. They still live with that anguish every day. It went to appeal, this case, went to the High Court. And it never went any further. Those convictions held.
It was rejected. The appeal was rejected.
So it's now 13 years after the fact, and this is now going back to the court.
Yeah, so the Schuler family campaigned, desperate to get answers about where Bruce was, campaigned and got the no body, no parole laws introduced into Queensland, and that was applied retrospectively to Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber's case. Of course, they say they're innocent and they can't say where the body is because they didn't do it.
And Fiona says she did that to compel them to confess.
Yes, and they never have.
And to say, well, I'm going to die in jail unless I say something, but it hasn't. It hasn't done that.
No, it hasn't. A new law in Queensland has allowed people like Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber to have another appeal, another chance at an appeal. And, for someone like Fiona who campaigned so hard for the nobody parole, she's, they're understandably upset because they do believe that this is then undermining that work that they did to get answers for other families and for themselves. It must be an awful thing to not only have someone that you love and care about murdered, but to never have that closure. And they live with that every day, every day of, what were his last moments, where is he? And being out in Palmerville, it's a property the size of Hong Kong. They did do an extensive search, but it really is looking like a needle for a haystack. But you've also got, it's rugged terrain. You've got crocs out there. There's, it's potentially the perfect place to hide a body. There's all the old mine shafts. The police did search them, but I'm sure there's more. It's it really is a enormous task to try and look for any remains. And I think the fact that there has never been a body has always left this case kind of unfinished for both sides, because both sides are very different. The Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber's family believe their claims of innocence and believe that it has been a miscarriage of justice. The Schuler family absolutely believe that the right people are behind bars. We spoke to both families extensively, and they both participated in the story. And while, during this investigation, it was, it's a serious story and some serious things could happen in the next, 6 to 12 months with this case, and could result in those murderers walking free, which is a scary thought for Bruce's family. But I really loved the families at the centre of this story. They were both beautiful. They were fun. We ventured out to Palmerville with Fiona and Bruce's kids. And as much as, it was a very difficult task for them, we still had our laughs, we still smiled, we still sat around at night and had a barbecue, dinner together.
We stayed at some of their family friends' place, which, you know, is very different to our traditional camping. I think Anne and I shared a donga, and which is like a shipping container. So we slept together in that with our mosquito nets over us, because, you know, the cane toads and the mosquitoes were everywhere.
The crew were in swags,
Yes.
and if you went to the bathroom on a night time, you could hear the cane toads kind of like whacking against the swags.
Some other little funny moments in the capturing of this story. I was doing the piece to camera, which is when the reporter speaks to the camera, and you'll notice that I'm on like a bit of an island in the middle of the Palmer River. So I had to get over there. So one of our, we had a couple of the local Indigenous elders looking out for us and looking after us while we were there, and one of them had to piggyback me across to the island so that I didn't get my pants wet before filming our piece to camera. But also we shot that right on 5 p.m, which is when the crocs start to emerge.
I don't know how much they were teasing you. Just
No, they weren't. I know. I believed it. I believed it around 5 o'clock, because then at
Yes.
9 you saw them.
Yeah.
You saw them in the water.
Yeah.
So I was
Yes,
trying
you'd see
to
their
do
eyes.
that piece
You'd
to
shine a light
camera.
and see their
Oh my
eyes.
god, it was. And they said from 5 o'clock. That's when the crocs come out. So, God loved. You know, our helpers were like planted in the trees, and you know,
keeping
watch for any of the little bubbles that might surface on the water. I was petrified.
High stakes, very high stakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I thought what was really interesting as well was the homestead. So we were able to go and film at the homestead, and
It was eerie, wasn't it?
yes, and you know, and because it had been left, I mean, you know, obviously there had been some changes in terms of items removed and things like that.
But there were still beds
But there was
and
still beds.
kitchen
It was still very
items
much set
and
up. Yeah.
Snake
Yes.
tracks all around, those
There's
snake
lots of
marks
snake
in the
tracks
dirt,
around.
and the grass was overgrown. I mean, it was you were like at the scene of in a horror movie, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is how I mean, you know, when this unfolded, that's how the local press did characterise Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber. It was, you know, they were kind of, it was like Wolf Creek compared to the Outback horror movie Wolf Creek. But going out to that homestead was, you know, it was eerie. But interestingly, you know, that was extensively searched. And one of the other confounding things about this case, as well as the fact that they've never found a body or the murder weapons, was the lack of DNA. They never found any trace of Bruce Schuler at the homestead or in the vehicles.
Or on the murderers themselves.
Yes, on the murderers themselves. Likewise, there was nothing of Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber at the scene of the crime, where they did find a very few drops of Bruce Schuler's DNA.
And you know, the life sentences that they were handed with that lack of evidence is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you can, you know, circumstantial cases do happen all the time. I mean, you know, every little piece of evidence builds a bigger picture, and obviously in this case, that's what the jury decided. That's what the jury decided unanimously. It took them 7 days to convict Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber
On the testimony of his three mates who heard gunshots, didn't see Bruce being killed, seeing the ute pull up.
between the three of them. They all
Between the three of them,
said
they all-
differing accounts,
Yeah.
and what one saw the other didn't. But between the three of them, yes.
And then, you know, that's where this story just goes down another, you know, a whole nother road of the DNA forensic scandal in Queensland. This case fell directly in the middle between 2007 and 2016 of when the Queensland Forensic Lab scandal played out. And that's when they introduced robots to test DNA in their laboratories, but found a staggering up to 92% of DNA was being missed on one of the machines. I mean, we spoke to a forensic expert in our story who said, well, one of two things has happened to you. You know, there either wasn't any DNA found in this case because they weren't there and they didn't do it, or it was them covering their tracks, or it got lost between being out in the bush, changing their clothes, washing their hands, you know, enough time to cover their tracks, or, you know, and then taking a swab, it getting lost on the way to the lab, and the DNA then getting into a machine that's losing 92%.
Well, he described it as a perfect storm. You're talking about a really vast area that takes hours to get to, and at least 20. I mean, you know, Bruce's mates didn't report him missing for at least 10 hours. By the time the police got out there, it was another, 24 hours plus. It's, and as the forensic expert told us, that you're also then, you've got those factors, so you've got the passage of time, but then you've also got the climate of far north Queensland, tropics, he said, which is just, a disaster for DNA. It just, can be eaten away.
Yeah. And
then on top of that, you have a situation where, as you said, this case fell in a time when there was huge problems with the forensic lab, which is very much on the public record of what was happening there. Yeah. He did say, though, because he found it remarkable that there was no DNA. If they had disposed of the body and removed the body, he would expect to find something. Now, he was not saying that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. I mean, Stephen Struber and Diane Wilson would argue that it wasn't there because they didn't do it. He wouldn't be drawn on that, but what he said is he was surprised there wasn't. There are reasons why it potentially wasn't there. Yeah. But the only way to get to the bottom of this puzzle of the DNA, was it there or was it not, given the fact that you had the forensic lab scandal at the time as well, is to retest. And he said that those samples would still be there. And it's in the interests of both parties to retest those samples.
This new law, what can you tell us about that?
It's a new law that was brought in into Queensland at the end of last year, and it gives people like Diane Wilson and Stephen Struber another chance to appeal on the basis that there is fresh and compelling evidence or new and compelling evidence. So that is what's being planned. A lot of what is being planned for that appeal is based on the findings by Graham Crowley, who's a former detective who's done a podcast into Where is Bruce Schuler, and has written a book.
And a lot of that evidence is actually in our story, which you can catch on YouTube.
Yes, that's right. And so that's the basis of an appeal. Now, that doesn't mean that the appeal will be heard, but it is being planned. And, Diane Wilson's sister, who firmly believes that her sister has been wrongfully imprisoned, is fighting for this, and, is hopeful that will happen. She's also been petitioning for a inquest. There was an investigation, a coronial investigation into Bruce Schuler, but she's now calling for an inquest. And in this story that was, both sides are so divided, that was the only common ground, was that there should be
And I do think that would be productive in this. Get everybody back into a courtroom and ask questions. I mean, that's what inquests are about, right?
Yeah. And she got 5,000. It closed at the end of July, and there's been 5,000 people sign that petition.
The other thing I do think is incredible about this story is that God love Sharon, in the fight for her sister, has convinced the public trustee of Queensland to release $600,000 from the sale of Palmerville Station, that was sold after Wilson and Struber went into jail. They've released $600,000 from the public trustee to pay for this appeal for these murderers to get another go at going back to court to prove their innocence.
That's right. Sharon, yeah.
Will that pass the pub test, do you think, Anne?
Well, it didn't with Fiona Schuler.
And so it shouldn't, You do have to ask the question, why do these murderers get access to hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight their innocence after being found guilty, sentenced to life, lost an appeal and lost in the High Court?
Well, I think that's what we've attempted to do in the program, which is to show the audience the evidence that was used to convict. It was circumstantial, but there was certainly enough of it for the jury to rule the way that they did. So to step the audience through the evidence that was used, and then hear from Graham Crowley with some of the new claims that he believes have a big question mark, and ultimately, for the Australian public to decide whether these two criminals should have another chance and should walk free. And I mean, that's what we've done in the television program, and that's something that if it does get to an appeal, that the courts will decide.
Dare I ask, Anne, what you think?
No.
No, not for us to decide. There is a huge appetite for true crime right now, and I'm sure everybody who gets involved in this case and watches it closely will have an opinion of their own. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And if you missed our story, you can catch it on the 60 Minutes YouTube channel or 9 Now. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.